George Otis, our next guest. Junior has documented transformation revivals around the world. He spent 18 months in Manchester, and he joins us on this historic weekend. George, great to have you on the show. Truly, as we see these stories, and specifically in Manchester, God really showed up in the small Kentucky town, correct?
Boy, he really did. I'd heard about the story from afar, had heard about it over several years, but when we got out there, we were quite stunned at the comprehensiveness of what God had done in this mountain community. And the fact that it was within the borders of the United States made it pretty special.
And George, it wasn't just about the transformation in Manchester. In fact, the whole as a whole church, in terms of the transformation, we also saw that, correct?
Yeah, God moved really not just in a city, but really in a county, Clay County, Kentucky, and it spread significantly beyond that to adjacent counties. And over the last several months, the story has been carried by folks from Kentucky all across the United States as part of what's been called the Hope for America Tour, sowing seeds in all kinds of places. So hope is definitely springing out of the hills of southeastern Kentucky.
And as I have mentioned to our guests watching, you have documented transformation revivals around the world. But interestingly, you say that Manchester is the only city in America that qualifies as a true transformation city. Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of people who use the word transformation use a very superficial and what I would call a low definition of what that means. In other words, we set the bar 6 inches off the ground, take a little bunny hop, and celebrate our accomplishments. But I think when we read scriptural definitions of what transforming revival is, we need to really elevate our expectations that God will invade every arena of human life and endeavor, even touching the land itself. And in Manchester, Kentucky, Clay County, and many of the other places we've documented, we've seen ecological change as well as social, spiritual, economic, and political.
And when you talk about the subject of social, economic, spiritual changes, in fact, our viewers may find this interesting. Manchester was once known the painkiller capital, but now it's known as the city of hope. When you look at the example of Manchester, George, and as you've documented other cities around the world, the hope for cities that are blighted, that are facing all kinds of challenges, I'm sure this gives you hope to see that the power of God can truly change not just an individual's life, but an entire city.
Yeah, over the last 15 years, we've been traveling all around the world and documenting some of God's finest handiwork, and people often ask me, what has impacted me the most over these years? And it's really an easy answer. It's been my faith. What I have seen has so elevated my faith that today I can go into virtually any situation or circumstance, no matter how desperate, and envision it differently.
What's also interesting, not just we've talked about, you've touched upon the spiritual, the social changes, but interestingly enough, you've also documented the transformation that the land, the physical land endures. You've seen a physical change in the land. For example, Kentucky, Manchester at least, was recently voted as the best water in Kentucky. The elk, the black bear populations that were down have returned. Is this as a result of the transformation of the city?
Yeah, there's so much that if we had time to talk about in this ecological transformation in eastern Kentucky, many facets to it, but it is absolutely an outflow of what happened in the hearts of the stewards of the land. There is a direct correlation between the land and the people in biblical times and in our times. And when the stewards of the land will get their hearts in alignment with the purposes and the ways of God, then the land will follow suit. We've seen it time and time again. We're in the middle of documenting a dramatic case of this in northeastern Brazil right now, in Algodão de Jandaíra, where it hadn't rained in 25 years, and the community was in its death throes. And when they began to turn to God, cry out, repent of their sin, the heavens opened up, and what followed was what the mayor there calls the flood of blessings, and turned this little community into a regional economic powerhouse. This is what God can do.
And somebody, sorry to interrupt you, George. George, we're running out of time, but a man who has really documented the changes that have been taking place around the world, George Otis Jr. Sir, a pleasure and a privilege to have you back on our broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.